5 phrases. That's all it took to kill a 7-year marriage. By Friday evening, I was sitting in my home office, staring at my computer screen, but my mind wasn't on the quarterly reports anymore. It was replaying every poisonous word that had come out of my wife's mouth over the past week. Each phrase had been delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and leave scars. But instead of breaking me down like she probably expected, they did something else entirely. They woke me up. Monday morning started like any other. I was making coffee in our kitchen when she walked in, already dressed for work, scrolling through her phone with that familiar look of irritation. Without even glancing up, she dropped the first bomb. You know, I've been thinking, maybe we just settled for each other. Just like that. No context, no warning. She said it the same way someone might comment on the weather. I stopped mid-pour, looked at her, and asked what she meant. She finally looked up from her phone, shrugged, and said, "Nothing." Forget I said anything. But I didn't forget. How could I? That phrase echoed in my head all day at work. We settled for each other. 7 years of marriage. And that's how she saw us? That's how she saw me. I realized then that this wasn't some random thought. This was calculated. This was her testing the waters, seeing how I'd react to her disrespect. Tuesday brought phrase number 2 during dinner. We were eating takeout from that Thai place we used to love, sitting across from each other in silence. Out of nowhere, she said, "I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd made different choices." This time she was looking right at me when she said it. There was no mistaking her meaning. I put down my fork, leaned back in my chair, and asked her directly, "Different choices like what?" She gave me that condescending smile I was starting to recognize and said, "Oh, you know, career, location, relationships, everything." The way she emphasized relationships made my blood run cold, but not because I was hurt. I was angry. Who did she think she was talking to? Some pushover who'd beg for her approval? I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Well, it's never too late to make different choices, is it?" Her smile faltered for just a second. Good. Let her think about that. Wednesday's phrase came during what should have been a normal conversation about weekend plans. I suggested we visit my parents since we hadn't seen them in months. That's when she hit me with, "I can't keep pretending to enjoy things I don't care about anymore." The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just talking about visiting my parents. She was talking about our entire life together, our shared experiences, our memories. Everything we'd built was apparently just an act for her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. Instead, I calmly asked, "How long have you been pretending?" She tried to backtrack, claiming she didn't mean it that way, but the damage was done. I could see through her game now. She was systematically dismantling our marriage, one cruel phrase at a time, probably hoping I'd be the one to finally call it quits so she could play the victim. Thursday's attack was the most vicious yet. We were getting ready for bed when she looked at me in the mirror and said, "Sometimes I look at couples who are actually happy and wonder what that feels like." Not we. Not us. She excluded me entirely from any possibility of happiness. She might as well have said I was incapable of making anyone happy. But here's what she didn't expect. Instead of defending myself or trying to prove her wrong, I simply nodded and said, "Yeah, I've been wondering the same thing lately." The look of confusion on her face was priceless. She'd expected me to fight for us, to beg her to tell me how to make her happy. Instead, I'd agreed with her assessment. For the first time all week, she was speechless. But Friday was when she delivered the final blow, the phrase that sealed everything. We were having coffee, just like Monday, when she said with complete casualness, "I think we both know this isn't working anymore." There it was, the culmination of her week-long campaign. She'd systematically torn down our marriage and was now declaring it officially dead. I set down my coffee cup and looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not a sad smile, not a bitter smile, but a knowing smile that seemed to unnerve her. "You know what?" I said, "You're absolutely right. This isn't working anymore." I stood up, kissed the top of her head like nothing had changed, and said, "Thanks for making that so clear." She called after me as I walked away, probably expecting some kind of dramatic confrontation, but I didn't turn around. I had work to do. Those 5 phrases had done more than reveal her true feelings about our marriage. They'd revealed her strategy. She thought she was manipulating me into being the bad guy, the one who'd give up first. What she didn't realize was that she'd just given me the perfect roadmap for my own plan. See, While she was busy delivering her carefully crafted insults, I was learning something valuable about my wife. She was calculating, manipulative, and completely convinced of her own cleverness. But she'd made one critical error. She'd underestimated me. She thought I'd crumble under the pressure of her emotional warfare. Instead, I was taking notes. That weekend, while she was out with friends, probably celebrating her successful week of psychological torture, I started putting together my own surprise. Because if she thought our marriage was over, she was right. But the ending was going to be written by me, not her. And unlike her amateur hour manipulation tactics, my finale was going to be something she'd never see coming. The best part? Every time she tried to deliver another cutting remark, every time she attempted to make me feel small or inadequate, I just smiled and agreed with her. It was driving her crazy. She'd spent so much energy crafting the perfect insults, and I was robbing her of the satisfaction of seeing them land. Instead, I was using them as fuel for what was coming next. Because here's what she didn't understand. A man who knows his worth doesn't need to defend it. And a man who's done playing games doesn't announce it. He just stops playing. My wife thought she was ending our marriage with her 5 phrases. What she'd actually done was hand me the keys to end it properly. On my terms. With my timing. And in a way that would make sure she never forgot the lesson about respecting the man she'd chosen to marry. The following Monday, I became a student of my own wife. Not the lovesick kind who hangs on every word, but the calculating kind who documents patterns. She'd shown me her hand with those 5 phrases, and now I needed to see the full picture of what I was dealing with. The changes in her behavior weren't subtle once I started paying attention. Take her phone, for instance. She'd always been casual about it before, leaving it on counters, asking me to check messages while she was driving. Now it was glued to her hand, face down on every surface, password protected with an urgency that screamed guilt. When it buzzed during dinner Tuesday night, she practically lunged for it, then caught herself and tried to play it cool. "Work stuff," she said, not looking at me. "At 8 p.m.? I asked, cutting into my steak. "You know how it is," she replied, but her fingers were already flying across the screen. I knew exactly how it was. I also knew that her company didn't send urgent texts after business hours, but I didn't call her on it. Instead, I filed it away with everything else I was collecting. Wednesday brought the first real test of my new approach. She was in the bathroom getting ready for work when her phone rang on the nightstand. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. When she came out and saw the missed call, her face went white for just a second before she recovered. "Probably spam," she said, but she took the phone into the bathroom to check the voicemail. When she came out, I was sitting on the bed, fully dressed, watching her with amusement. "Everything okay?" I asked with fake concern. "Fine," she snapped, then caught herself. "Sorry, just stressed about the presentation today." "What presentation?" I asked innocently. She froze. There was no presentation. We both knew it. But instead of pressing her, I just nodded and said, "Well, good luck with that." The relief on her face was pathetic. She thought she'd dodged a bullet. What she didn't realize was that I was counting every lie, every slip-up, every moment of panic. By Thursday, the phone calls were happening regularly. Always when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Always requiring her to leave the room. Always followed by mood swings that ranged from giddy excitement to guilty anxiety. The pattern was so obvious it was almost insulting. Did she really think I was that oblivious? That evening, I decided to have some fun with her paranoia. She was on the couch, texting furiously, when I walked over and sat down right next to her. Close enough to see the screen if I wanted to. She immediately tilted the phone away and stopped typing. "Don't let me interrupt," I said, settling back into the cushions. "You seemed really focused on whatever you were writing." "It's nothing important," she said, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Must be pretty engaging nothing," I replied. "You've been staring at that screen for 20 minutes. She looked at me then, trying to read my expression. Was I suspicious? Was I testing her? The uncertainty was eating her alive. Good. Let her wonder. Let her stress about what I knew and what I didn't know. "Just catching up with a friend," she finally said. "Anyone I know?" I asked casually. Another pause. Another calculation. "I don't think so. Someone from college." "That's nice," I said, reaching for the remote. It's good to reconnect with old friends. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, probably planning my emotional destruction with some other man, and I was calmly encouraging her social connections. The cognitive dissonance was clearly messing with her head. Friday brought the confrontation I'd been waiting for. She'd been acting increasingly erratic all week, caught between the thrill of her secret activities and the stress of hiding them from someone she thought was clueless. The pressure finally got to her during what should have been a simple conversation about weekend plans. "We should probably talk," she said over breakfast, using that serious tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "About what?" I asked, not looking up from my eggs. "About us. About where this is going." I set down my fork and gave her my full attention. "Where what is going?" "Our marriage," she said, like she was explaining something to a child. "We've been having problems." "Have we?" I asked with genuine curiosity. I hadn't noticed any problems on my end. That caught her off guard. She'd expected me to agree, to acknowledge the issues she'd been manufacturing all week. Instead, I was forcing her to articulate exactly what problem she was talking about. "Well, we barely talk anymore," she said weakly. "We're talking right now," I pointed out. "That's not what I mean, and you know it." "Actually, I don't know it," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Why don't you explain exactly what you mean?" She was getting frustrated now. This wasn't going according to her script. She was supposed to hint at problems, I was supposed to agree or get defensive, and then she could position herself as the reasonable one trying to save our marriage. Instead, I was making her spell out her accusations. "It just feels like we're not connected anymore," she tried again. "Connected how?" I asked. "We live in the same house, eat dinner together most nights, share a bed. Seems pretty connected to me." "Emotionally connected," she said with exasperation. "Ah," I said, nodding like I finally understood. "And whose fault do you think that is?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. She'd been expecting me to take responsibility, to ask how I could fix things, to beg for another chance. Instead, I was asking her to assign blame. And we both knew where the blame belonged. "It's not about fault," she said defensively. "Isn't it?" I asked, standing up to refill my coffee. "I mean, if someone in this marriage has been emotionally distant, if someone has been checked out, if someone has been looking elsewhere for connection." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Well, I guess that person would know who's at fault." Her face went pale. She knew that I knew. Maybe not the details, but she could tell I wasn't the clueless husband she'd been counting on. The power dynamic had shifted, and she was scrambling to regain control. "I don't know what you're implying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm not implying anything," I said calmly. "I'm just saying that if our marriage has problems, maybe we should look at what's causing them instead of just accepting them as inevitable." That weekend, while she was supposedly shopping with friends, I made some calls of my own. Not to private investigators or divorce lawyers, not yet. Those would come later. These calls were to people who'd known us as a couple, people who might have noticed things I'd missed. My brother, her sister, mutual friends who might have heard something or seen something that would fill in the gaps. The picture that emerged was enlightening. According to her sister, she'd been asking hypothetical questions about divorce for months. According to our mutual friend, she'd been seen having lunch with some guy from her gym on multiple occasions. According to my brother, she'd been asking odd questions about my work schedule and when I'd be traveling. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning. This wasn't some spontaneous affair or moment of weakness. This was a calculated campaign to end our marriage on her terms, in her timing, with her coming out as the sympathetic victim of an emotionally distant husband. But she'd made a critical error in her planning. She'd assumed I'd react emotionally, that I'd either fight desperately to save the marriage or collapse under the weight of her rejection. She'd never considered the possibility that I'd respond strategically, that I'd document her behavior, gather evidence, and plan my own response. Sunday night, as we were getting ready for bed, she tried one more time to get a reaction out of me. "Do you ever think about what would happen if we weren't together anymore?" she asked, brushing her teeth. I considered the question seriously, then answered honestly. "Yeah, I think about it sometimes." She stopped brushing. "You do?" "Sure," I said, washing my face. "Don't you?" "Well, yes, but..." She was clearly expecting a different response. "But what?" I asked, drying my hands. "I guess I thought you'd be more upset by the idea." I looked at her reflection in the mirror. Why would I be upset about something that might be better for both of us? The toothbrush fell out of her hand. She'd spent weeks trying to push me toward this conclusion, but now that I'd reached it independently, she was panicking. She wanted to end the marriage, but she wanted to be the one in control of how it ended. I didn't say it would be better, she backtracked quickly. You didn't have to, I said, heading toward the bedroom. Your actions have been saying it loud and clear. That night, she lay awake beside me. I could feel her tension, her confusion, her growing fear that she was losing control of the narrative she'd been so carefully crafting. She'd thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. What she didn't realize was that I'd figured out the game she was playing, and I was about to flip the board entirely. Because while she'd been focused on her exit strategy, I'd been developing my own. And unlike her amateur attempts at psychological manipulation, my plan was going to be devastating, definitive, and completely unexpected. She wanted out of our marriage. Fine. But she was going to learn that getting what you want sometimes comes with consequences you never saw coming. Tuesday afternoon changed everything. I was supposed to be in Denver until Thursday for a client meeting, but the whole thing got canceled last minute due to their CEO having a family emergency. Instead of calling ahead to let her know I was coming home early, I decided to surprise her. Looking back, I'm the one who got surprised. I pulled into our driveway at 3:30, noticing immediately that there was a silver Audi parked across the street that I didn't recognize. Expensive car, clean, definitely not belonging to any of our neighbors. My gut told me everything I needed to know, but my logical mind wanted proof. I parked in the garage as usual and entered through the kitchen. The house was quiet, but not empty. I could hear voices coming from upstairs. Low voices, intimate voices. Voices that had no business being in my bedroom in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. Instead of charging up there like some cliché, outraged husband, I did what I always do. I thought strategically. Confronting them in the moment would give her the upper hand. She'd claim it was the first time, that she was confused, that she was sorry. She'd find a way to make this about our marriage problems, about how I'd driven her to this. No, this required a different approach. I quietly pulled out my phone and started recording as I walked up the stairs. The voices became clearer with each step. Her voice, breathless and excited. His voice, deep and confident. They weren't just talking. They were planning. He'll be gone until Thursday, I heard her say as I reached the landing. We have the whole house to ourselves. What about after? The male voice asked. When are you going to tell him? Soon, she replied. I've been laying the groundwork for weeks. He's already starting to question things. I just need him to be the one to bring up divorce first. Then I can play the reluctant victim. I stopped recording and stood there for a moment, processing what I'd just heard. She wasn't just cheating. She was orchestrating my emotional destruction for her own convenience. Every phrase from last week, every manipulation, every calculated cruelty, it was all part of a plan to make me the villain in our divorce story. What if he doesn't take the bait? The guy asked. He will, she said with complete confidence. He's too proud to stay in a marriage where he thinks he's not wanted. I just need to keep pushing until he snaps. And then I get half of everything without looking like the bad guy. My family will sympathize with me. His family will blame him for giving up too easily, and everyone will think I tried to save the marriage while he just walked away. The sophistication of her manipulation was almost impressive. Almost. She'd spent months, maybe longer, crafting this elaborate scheme to destroy me financially and socially while preserving her own reputation. She'd turned our marriage into a long con, and I was supposed to be the mark. But here's what she hadn't counted on. I'd been recording everything for the past 10 minutes, and I was about to add some visual evidence to my collection. I pulled out my phone again and opened the camera app. Then I walked to our bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, and captured exactly what I expected to see. My wife of 7 years, naked in our bed with a man I'd never seen before. But I didn't burst in. I didn't scream or throw punches or create the dramatic scene she probably would have enjoyed. Instead, I took my evidence and walked back downstairs as quietly as I'd come up. In my home office, I uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage account and made several backup copies. Then I sat in my chair and started planning. She thought she was playing chess, but she'd just handed me checkmate in one move. The only question now was timing. I heard them leave about an hour later. Her footsteps coming down the stairs, his deeper voice in the hallway, the front door closing, the Audi starting up outside. Then she was back upstairs, probably showering, probably washing away the evidence of her betrayal before preparing to greet her loving husband when he returned from his business trip. When she came downstairs 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the living room reading a magazine as if I'd been there all afternoon. "You're home early," she said, and I could hear the panic buried beneath her casual tone. "Meeting got canceled," I replied without looking up. "Figured I'd surprise you." "How long have you been here?" she asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just walked in," I lied smoothly. "Why? Were you expecting someone?" The pause was telling. She was calculating, trying to figure out if I knew anything, if I'd seen anything, if her perfect plan was compromised. "No, just surprised to see you," she said finally. "I was upstairs taking a nap." "Must have been a good nap," I said, finally looking at her. "You look refreshed." She flinched at that, but recovered quickly. "Yeah, I was tired. Long day at work." "I bet," I said, returning to my magazine. "Hard work can really wear you out." For the next 3 days, I watched her squirm. She knew I was acting differently, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly how. I was calmer, more detached, almost amused by her attempts to gauge my mood. When she tried to pick fights, I refused to engage. When she threw out another one of her calculated insults, I just shrugged and agreed with her. Thursday night, she made her boldest move yet. "I think we should consider couples therapy," she announced over dinner. I nearly laughed out loud. Here was a woman who'd been systematically planning my emotional and financial destruction, suggesting therapy as if she was trying to save our marriage. The audacity was breathtaking. "Why?" I asked simply. "Because I think we're growing apart," she said with fake concern. "I love you, but I'm worried about us." "You love me," I repeated, setting down my fork. "Of course I do," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I looked down at her hand on mine, the same hand that had been all over another man just 2 days ago, and felt nothing but disgust. But I didn't pull away. Instead, I looked her directly in the eyes and asked, "What does love mean to you?" "What do you mean?" she asked, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "I mean, how do you define love? What does it look like in action?" She was trapped. If she gave the standard answer about trust and faithfulness and commitment, she'd be describing everything she was violating. If she gave some watered-down version, she'd reveal that her definition of love was convenient and self-serving. "It means caring about someone's happiness," she said carefully. "Whose happiness?" I asked. "What? Whose happiness? Yours or mine? Because lately, it seems like your version of love is making sure you're happy, regardless of how it affects me." She tried to deny it, tried to flip the conversation back to my supposed emotional distance, but I cut her off. "You know what I think?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "I think you've already checked out of this marriage. I think you're just going through the motions, waiting for the right moment to make your exit. And I think this whole therapy suggestion is just another way to buy yourself time to position yourself as the victim." Her face went white. I was too close to the truth, and she knew it. "That's not fair," she said weakly. "Isn't it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, everything you've said and done for the past few weeks has been designed to push me away. The question is, why? If you want out, why not just say so? Why all the games?" "I don't want out," she lied. "Yes, you do," I said with complete certainty. "The question is whether you want to end this marriage honestly or whether you want to keep playing these manipulation games until I do it for you." She was panic-breathing now, realizing that her carefully crafted plan was falling apart. I was supposed to be emotional, desperate, begging her to fight for us. Instead, I was calmly dissecting her strategy and forcing her to confront her own dishonesty. "I think you're being paranoid," she said, but her voice was shaking. "Am I?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "Want to test that theory?" The look of terror that crossed her face told me everything. She knew I had something. She didn't know what, but she knew her game was over. "What's on your phone?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Evidence," I said simply. "Evidence of exactly the kind of person I married, and exactly the kind of marriage we really have." I didn't show her the recordings or the photos. Not yet, but I let her know they existed. I let her sit with the knowledge that her secret was no longer secret, that her plan was no longer hidden, that her control over this situation was gone. "I don't know what you think you have," she said, but she was already backing down. "I have the truth," I said, standing up from the table. "And tomorrow, we're going to discuss what happens next. But here's what's not going to happen. You're not going to manipulate me into being the bad guy. You're not going to rewrite history to make yourself the victim. And you're sure as hell not going to walk away from this marriage with half my assets while playing the poor abandoned wife." I left her sitting at the dinner table, probably trying to figure out what I knew and how much trouble she was in. The answer was simple. I knew everything, and she was in more trouble than she could possibly imagine. Because while she'd been planning her exit strategy, I'd been planning my response. And unlike her amateur manipulation tactics, my plan was going to be swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating. She wanted to end our marriage? Fine. But she was about to learn that actions have consequences, and some games are too dangerous to play with the wrong opponent. Friday morning, I woke up with the clarity of a man who'd finally stopped pretending. While she was in the shower, I made 3 calls that would change everything. First, my attorney. Second, my accountant. Third, a private investigator who specialized in divorce cases involving infidelity. By the time she came downstairs, I had secured our joint accounts and scheduled meetings for Monday. But you wouldn't know it from looking at me. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee and newspaper, the picture of suburban normalcy. Sleep well? I asked without looking up. Fine, she said, but her voice was tight. You? Like a baby, I replied. Nothing like a clear conscience for a good night's sleep. She poured coffee with shaking hands. The psychological pressure was getting to her, and we both knew it. About last night, she started carefully. What about it? I asked, turning the page. I think maybe we were both saying things we didn't mean. Were we? I looked at her then, my expression neutral. I meant every word I said. Did you? Another trap. She couldn't back down without looking manipulative, but pushing forward meant walking deeper into my web. I just think we should talk to someone professional, she said weakly. I agree completely, I said, folding the newspaper. In fact, I've already arranged for us to talk to several professionals next week. The color drained from her face. What kind of professionals? The kind that help people end marriages properly, I said, standing to refill my coffee. Since that's clearly what you want, I figured we should do it right. That weekend was a masterclass in psychological warfare. When she tried to seduce me Saturday night, I politely declined, saying I wasn't feeling emotionally connected. When she tried to pick a fight Sunday morning, I agreed with every criticism, robbing her of the conflict she wanted. You're acting weird, she finally exploded Sunday afternoon. Weird how? I asked from the couch where I was watching football. Too calm, too detached. Maybe I'm just finally seeing things clearly, I said without taking my eyes off the screen. Seeing what clearly? Everything, I said simply. You, me, us, this whole situation. It's amazing how much clearer things become when you stop trying to fix something that's already broken. Monday brought the first domino. My attorney laid out exactly what her affair was going to cost her. In our state, adultery was grounds for fault-based divorce, which meant she could forget about taking half my assets. The recordings I'd made painted a picture of systematic deception that no judge would reward. She planned this, I told him, playing back the recording. She's been laying groundwork for months to make me look like the bad guy. Well, he said with a grim smile, she picked the wrong guy to con. With this evidence, we can protect your assets and probably get her to pay your legal fees too. Tuesday, I met with our financial planner to secure everything she might try to access. I also discovered she'd been moving small amounts into a separate account for 6 months. Not enough to trigger alerts, but enough to build herself a nest egg. Wednesday brought a surprise visitor. Her sister showed up at my office, looking nervous. I think we need to talk, she said, sitting across from my desk. For 20 minutes, she laid out everything she knew. The affair had been going on for 4 months. The guy was her personal trainer, recently divorced, looking for someone to support his lifestyle. Her sister had confided everything, thinking she had an ally. I told her she was making a mistake, she said. But she said you'd never find out, and even if you did, she'd already positioned herself as the victim. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you deserve better, she said simply. And because actions have consequences. Thursday, the private investigator delivered his full report. Photos, video, financial records, witness statements. Her lover had been married before and divorced for the same reason. He had a pattern of targeting married women with assets, romancing them through divorce, then moving on. Your wife picked a real winner, the investigator said dryly. This guy's done this 3 times before. She thinks she's his future, but she's just his current project. That night, she tried one last manipulation. She cooked my favorite dinner, wore the dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, and attempted to recreate marital bliss. I've been thinking about what you said, she began over dessert. Which part? I asked. About us being broken. I think maybe we can fix this. Can we? I asked, cutting into my steak. What would that look like? We could go to counseling, work on our communication, maybe take a vacation together. I looked at her across the table, this woman who'd been systematically destroying our marriage while planning her exit strategy. That's an interesting proposal, I said. But I have a better idea. What's that? She asked hopefully. How about instead of pretending we can fix something you've already destroyed, we just move forward with ending it honestly? I don't understand, she said, panic creeping back into her voice. I think you do, I said, pulling out my phone. The question is whether you want to do this the easy way or the hard way. I showed her one photo, her face in our bedroom, caught betraying everything our marriage represented. She stared at the image, then looked up with fear and defiance. How long have you known? She asked quietly. Long enough, I said. Long enough to document everything. Long enough to protect myself. Long enough to plan exactly how this is going to end. What do you want? She asked. I want you to stop pretending, I said. I want you to stop lying. And I want you to understand that your plan to destroy me while playing the victim just backfired spectacularly. She tried to cry then, tried to play the remorseful wife. But crocodile tears don't work on someone who's heard you planning their destruction. Save it, I said calmly. We both know this isn't remorse. This is panic. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. That's not true, she whispered. Isn't it? I asked. Because I have recordings that suggest otherwise. Hours of them. You planning my downfall, strategizing about making me the villain, calculating how to steal half my assets. The realization hit her like a physical blow. I had proof of the conspiracy, evidence of premeditation, everything needed to destroy her reputation. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely audible. Now you're going to learn what happens when you try to outsmart someone who's better at this game, I said, standing. Tomorrow, you're going to get a very special surprise. And unlike your weeks of psychological torture, my surprise is going to be swift, devastating, and completely final. Friday morning arrived with the precision of a surgical strike. While she was getting ready for work, probably planning another secret rendezvous with her trainer, I was downstairs preparing the final act of our marriage. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter like a bomb waiting to detonate. Divorce papers, asset protection documents, and a USB drive containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered. But that wasn't the surprise. That was just the paperwork. The real surprise was sitting in our driveway. Honey, I called upstairs. Could you come down here for a minute? She appeared at the top of the stairs, looking confused by my casual tone. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I said, gesturing toward the front door. I just want to show you something. She followed me outside, still in her bathrobe, and stopped dead when she saw them. Her boyfriend's silver Audi was parked behind my car, and he was standing next to it looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was her parents' car parked across the street, with both of them sitting inside, staring at the scene with obvious confusion. What is this? She whispered, her face going white. This, I said calmly, is accountability. I'd called everyone the night before. Her parents, my parents, her sister, our mutual friends. Told them there was something important they needed to see, something that would explain why our marriage was ending. I'd been careful not to reveal too much, just enough to ensure they'd show up. Her trainer looked between us nervously. Look, man, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said, pulling out my phone. You're exactly who I thought you were. I played the recording loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice, planning my emotional destruction. His voice, encouraging her manipulation. Their voices, plotting to steal my assets while painting me as the villain. Her parents got out of their car, looking stunned. Her mother's face crumpled as she realized what she was hearing. Her father's expression hardened as he understood the scope of his daughter's deception. Please, she begged, grabbing my arm. We can work this out. Privately. Privately. I asked, shaking her off. Like you worked out your affair privately? Like you planned my destruction privately? No, I think public is exactly the right setting for this conversation. My own parents arrived then, along with her sister and two of our closest friends. I timed it perfectly. Everyone who mattered, everyone whose opinion she cared about, everyone she'd planned to lie to about why our marriage failed. I want everyone here to understand something, I announced, my voice carrying across the suburban morning quiet. This woman spent months planning to destroy me. She had an affair, moved money into secret accounts, and orchestrated a campaign to make me look like the bad husband while she played the innocent victim. I held up the USB drive. Everything's on here. The affair, the financial manipulation, the psychological torture. Every lie she told, every scheme she hatched, every moment she betrayed not just me, but everyone who trusted her. Her trainer tried to leave, but I blocked his path. Oh no, you're not going anywhere. You're part of this story too. Tell everyone how you've done this before. Tell them about your other 3 marriages, your pattern of targeting married women for their money. He looked around at the assembled crowd, realized he was trapped, and decided to cut his losses. This is crazy, lady. I never promised you anything. You knew what this was. The betrayal on her face was priceless. Her great love affair, her reason for destroying our marriage, had just revealed itself as nothing more than a predator using her for money and convenience. That's not true, she said desperately, but even she could hear how pathetic it sounded. Actually, it is, said the private investigator, stepping out of his car parked down the street. I have documentation of his pattern with previous targets. Your wife was just next in line. The crowd was growing. Neighbors were coming out to see what was happening. Her co-workers would hear about this by lunch. Her social circle would be talking about it for months. You want to know the most pathetic part? I asked, addressing the audience but looking directly at her. She thought she was smart. She thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. But she was just another mark in an old con game, and she was too arrogant to see it. Her mother finally spoke, her voice shaking with disappointment. How could you do this? How could you throw away everything good in your life for this? Mom, you don't understand, she started, but her father cut her off. I understand perfectly, he said coldly. I understand that you're not the daughter I raised. The daughter I raised had integrity. The trainer had heard enough. He got in his car and drove away, leaving her standing there in her bathrobe, exposed and abandoned in front of everyone who mattered to her. This is what happens, I said, addressing her directly now, when you mistake kindness for weakness, when you confuse patience with stupidity, when you think you can destroy someone who's better at this game than you are. I handed her the envelope. Divorce papers, already filed, along with a detailed accounting of every asset you tried to hide, every lie you told, and every law you broke in the process. You can't do this, she whispered. I already did, I said. And unlike your months of scheming and manipulation, my plan actually worked. I turned to address the crowd one final time. I want everyone here to remember this moment. Remember what happens when someone chooses deception over honesty, betrayal over loyalty, and greed over love. Some lessons are worth learning publicly. As I walked back toward my house, leaving her standing there with the wreckage of her reputation scattered around her feet, I heard her sister say quietly, "You brought this on yourself." The surprise was complete, swift, devastating, and absolutely final, just like I'd promised. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my home office, now officially my office alone, reviewing the final divorce settlement. Everything had gone exactly as planned. She'd gotten nothing beyond what the law required for basic necessities, which wasn't much considering her documented adultery and financial deception. The house was mine. The investments were mine. Even her legal fees had become her problem when her attorney dropped her after she couldn't pay his retainer. Turns out her secret nest egg wasn't as substantial as she'd hoped, and her boyfriend had vanished the moment things got complicated. My phone buzzed with a text from her sister. She's staying with friends now. Lost her job yesterday. The whole thing became public at her workplace. I deleted the message without responding. Not my problem anymore. The irony was perfect. She'd spent months planning my social and financial destruction, and instead had orchestrated her own. Her reputation in our community was destroyed. Her family had distanced themselves from her. Her friends had chosen sides, and most had chosen mine after hearing the evidence. But the best part wasn't her downfall. The best part was discovering who I really was when pushed to my limit. For 7 years, I'd been the accommodating husband, the patient partner, the man who avoided conflict for the sake of peace. I thought that made me a good person. What I learned was that it just made me a target. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find my neighbor from across the street, holding a casserole dish. "Thought you might want a home-cooked meal," she said with a warm smile. "I know you've been through a lot lately." She was attractive, divorced herself about a year ago, and had always been friendly but respectful of boundaries. Now, with my marriage definitively over, those boundaries had shifted. That's very thoughtful, I said, accepting the dish. Would you like to come in for coffee? I'd like that, she said. As we sat in my kitchen, she asked, how are you holding up? Really? Better than I expected, I said honestly. I thought I'd feel guilty about how everything went down, but I don't. I feel liberated. You should, she said firmly. What she did was inexcusable. The whole neighborhood heard about it. I have to say, most of us weren't surprised.